In the world of film geekdom, it really comes down to one simple question: Star Wars or Star Trek? For the longest time, I was a Jedi kind of guy, but I've since gone to the dark side and actually joined up with Starfleet. That's because as I've grown and become an adult, I've learned that Star Trek is very, very good. And today there's lots of fandoms to join. You could be a Zack Snyder fan and believe all his work has come from a holier place. You could be a Marvel fan and overlook even the dark patches in the studio's filmography. For a long time, I would have considered myself as part of the Whedonverse. Then cancel culture came a-knockin'. In recent years, I've self-labeled as a movie buff and just sorta moved on. But what happens when the fans are the ones making the movies? Do we get imitation art, creating new art for old fans? And what happens when the fans leave a creator with nowhere to go next? Welcome to Another Lens. My name's Jay Kennedy, and I like movies. On this show, I'd like to explore what's happening today in the world of film, dive into Hollywood's short history, and share with you my thoughts about what's rattling around in my head when it comes to movies. So if you'll join me, grab a hot cup, get comfy, and let's take a look from another lens. Greta Garbo was a Swedish actress that achieved international fame during the golden age of Hollywood for her work in popular films like Grand Hotel in 1932 and Anna Karenina in 1935. So popular was Greta that in 1999, the American Film Institute ranked Garbo 5th on the list of the greatest female stars of classic Hollywood cinema. In the 1930s, Greta Garbo had a very obsessive fan by the name of Mercedes de Acosta. Acosta was infatuated with Garbo, pursuing her relentlessly with letters, gifts, and she even managed to gain access to Garbo's inner circle. Now, rumors did flutter about the pair having a volatile romance, but publicly, Garbo's camp reported being uncomfortable with Acosta's intense admiration. While not exactly a typical stalking case by today's standards, the dynamics between Garbo and Mercedes de Acosta have been cited as a very early example of a fan crossing boundaries. The notion of fans is a fairly modern concept. For example, Aristotle was certainly revered for his intellectual acumen, but his students didn't worship him like teenagers worshipped Elvis in the 50s, and similarly with the Beatles in the 60s. Both of these music fandoms found their way into film history with Bye Bye Birdie, satirizing Elvis and rock and roll's impact on American teenagers, and A Hard Day's Night, where on any typical day, the Beatles are chased down by ravenous packs of fans. And because the concept of fans is more modern, it's no surprise that these images don't appear on celluloid until a little later in cinema's history. One of the first instances on film came from a very well-known name actor, but it was his first time directing. The movie follows a radio DJ that gets familiar calls when he's on the air. Soon, the erratic caller begins to stalk and finally break into the DJ's home, leading to a confrontation. The film was named Play Misty for Me, and it was the debut feature of Clint Eastwood in 1971. The film was a critical and commercial success and was a boom to the thriller genre. It's really no surprise that Clint Eastwood acknowledged his influence to direct a story like this, famously taking inspiration from another filmmaker he was a fan of, Alfred Hitchcock. But hey, who isn't a fan of Hitchcock? Other films showcased fandom to this degree. Movies like The King of Comedy, The Fan, Cecil B. Demented, and even Fatal Attraction. They all dabble in this trope. But when we're talking about movies about obsessive fans, one in particular is always top of mind. In 1987, Stephen King was already a highly successful and well-known author. That year, when King released his new novel, he mentioned that the inspiration came in part from his experiences with overzealous fans and the darker side of fame. In 1990, Rob Reiner directed the film adaptation of Misery. The story portrays Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates, as such a big fan of fictional writer Paul Sheldon's Misery series that when she learns that the writer has killed off his popular character, she holds him captive in the guise of nursing him back to health after a car accident. While being held against his will, Annie forces Paul to change the story and save her favorite character from death. The film was a critical smash and is beloved in the horror genre. Kathy Bates won an Oscar for her role, and it's often regarded as one of her best of all time. That's saying a lot because she has a ton of iconic work. In recent years, we've seen that fans have the power to overturn decisions made by studios. Two famous cases come to mind. The first is the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League. After the horribly sad and unexpected death of his daughter, Snyder walked away from the project to be close to his family. Warner Bros. Studios, not looking to lose momentum, hired Avengers director Joss Whedon to reshoot, rewrite, and direct the remainder of the picture. In 2017, Justice League was released to middling reviews, and the fans almost immediately demanded Warner Brothers to #release the Snyder Cut. This would continue for years until in 2021, with the release of HBO Max, Zack Snyder's Justice League was available to the world. The feature was a black and white 4:3 ratio superhero epic. The Snyder Cut is 2 hours longer, with plenty of new footage, and removes a lot of the Joss Whedon humor that found its way into the theatrical release. I just think that's a cool precedent. It's an amazing thing. I'm honored, and I'm happy for the fans, Zack Snyder said after the announcement that his vision would be made available. Upon release, Snyder's fans were quick to praise the work, as they have with almost everything the man has released since then. The general consensus from other cinephiles has been that the Snyder Cut is definitely better than Whedon's release, but that it's filled with too much slow motion and does some of the characters dirty. I, for one, have a problem with Wonder Woman exploding a man in front of school-age children, but that's just me. The second example comes to us from the world of Star Wars. Now, Star Wars has arguably one of the biggest fandoms of all time, so when creator George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney's CEO Bob Iger for $4 billion, you could say there was trepidation from his supporters. And so, we're about to talk about the notoriously divisive release of Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Before we get into this one, please know I believe the greatest crime is that this trilogy wasn't written prior to shooting. But okay, let's do this thing. Director Rian Johnson made intentional decisions to subvert the expectations of Star Wars fans. He disregarded the mystery box that director J.J. Abrams had left to pick up from The Force Awakens, specifically the identity of Rey's parents. He made Luke Skywalker a disgruntled loner who had given up. New characters divided the audiences, specifically the addition of Rose falling in love with Finn. Anyway, for all these reasons and more, people weren't too happy. This resulted in a Rotten Tomatoes critic score of 91% positive reviews and an audience score of only 42%. Fans pushed the pressure back on Disney, and Star Wars head Kathleen Kennedy to right the ship. Kennedy hired back J.J. Abrams to fix the damage, and so he went to work. Rey's parentage was now connected to a huge character from the canon. Rose was basically written out of the film. There was more nostalgia thrown into this movie than The Force Awakens, with lots of cameos. And when it was released, the Rotten Tomatoes score was reversed. Now audiences praised the film at 86% positive rate, but critically it sat at 56%. Abrams expressed this about the immense challenge and responsibility of concluding the Skywalker saga. Endings are the thing that scare me the most. This is about bringing this thing to a close in a way that is emotional and meaningful, and also satisfying in terms of actually answering as many questions as possible. So if years from now, someone's watching these movies, all 9 of them, they're watching a story that is as cohesive as possible. And so, at least for me, The Rise of Skywalker was the thing that killed Star Wars. The fandom had crushed my Star Wars dreams, and with everything that I've said so far, you'd think that fans aren't good for movies. But trust me, not all parts of fandoms are bad. In 1999, a small film release that only grossed $90 million worldwide. Its ensemble cast included Tony Shalhoub, Sam Rockwell, Justin Long, Missy Pyle, Alan Rickman, Sigourney Weaver, and by now you may have guessed, it starred Tim Allen. The film was Galaxy Quest. The story follows the actors who played Star Trek-like characters on the fictional TV series Galaxy Quest. When real-life aliens mistake the show for historical documents, the actors are sucked up into a world of danger in real-life space to help these aliens defeat an enemy. It is great fun. The film also explores the relationship between actors and their dedicated fan base. Mostly this is done satirically at a sci-fi convention. But it also adoringly highlights the impact of fandom on both the performers and the audience. And all of this is just a stand-in for real-life Star Trek fans. Or Trekkers. I'm not sure what they're calling themselves, but I know the term Trekkies is derogatory in some circles. Over the years, Galaxy Quest has gained cult status, with fans organizing screenings, and a documentary has even been filmed about its impact on fandom. The film is recognized now as a beloved classic. Fanboys, on the other hand, has not been given the same treatment. In 2008, a raunchy comedy about Star Wars fans trying to steal a copy of The Phantom Menace from George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch released. It starred Seth Rogen, Kristen Bell, Jay Baruchel, Sam Huntington, Chris Marquette, and Dan Fogler. And Fanboys is filled with the junk film buffs love. There's mass quantities of inside jokes and hilarious cameos by cult heroes like Kevin Smith, Billy D. Williams, Carrie Fisher, and of course, Canadian-born William Shatner. And it does lovingly depict the guys you hung out with in high school who argued over the forbidden love of Luke and Leia. But fanboys never really found the same audience that Galaxy Quest did. It may have beat the comedy drum too hard. In fact, since it takes place in 1998, there are a ton of mentions to the protagonists being quote unquote losers. In 2023, being a part of a fandom means being part of a community, and everyone wants to feel included, and they should feel that way. And I think we've stepped into a world where sci-fi fantasy fans no longer are treated like outcasts like the cast of fanboys did in the 1998 setting. And if we're finger pointing, this change in culture could be because of the work of one guy. And it's fitting that we talk about him now as the ultimate fan. Born in 1973 in Westfield, New Jersey, Kevin Feige was obsessed with movies. More specifically, he was obsessed with blockbuster movies, and he loved sequels. Famously, he skipped his prom to go to the movies. Feige got his start in the Hollywood industry working for the wife of Richard Donner, Lauren Shuler Donner. Richard Donner had already made a name in the world of superhero films with Superman and Superman 2. But now, the Donner-Shuler production company was taking a run at Marvel Comics' X-Men. And Feige watched and he learned. He worked behind the scenes on the Raimi Spider-Man movies, and he continued to devour all the comic books that he could. And when the time came, Kevin Feige would step up to become the most important producer in the world, running Marvel Studios. In 2008, the world would hear Samuel L. Jackson mention the Avengers Initiative for the very first time. This was Feige's vision, an interconnecting world of movies, just like the comic books. And in 2012, when the vision was finally released to the world, the Avengers changed everything. Universal Pictures tested out their Dark Universe with The Mummy, starring Mission Impossible's Tom Cruise. Warner Brothers tried to play catch up with the DC Extended Universe. Godzilla and King Kong got in the game with the Monsterverse. Horror even took a whack with a connective Conjuring universe. But all paled in comparison to Kevin Feige's MCU. Fans gobbled up the movies, making each release a must-see theatrical event. The post-credit teaser scene was perfected, usually showcasing characters that would be a big deal in upcoming movies. And the fandom remained fully committed until Avengers Endgame in 2019. From 2008 to 2019, Marvel Studios had dominated. The chips in the armor were about to start, but Disney still had a money-making juggernaut. Today, 4 out of the top 10 highest-grossing films of all time are from Marvel Studios and the ultimate fanboy who had changed the industry. Directors are fans too. Spielberg and Lucas created Indiana Jones because they were fans of the serials they watched growing up. Christopher Nolan made Interstellar as a fan of Stanley Kubrick, whose 2001 A Space Odyssey can certainly be seen as inspiration. Even controversial director Woody Allen made Play It Again, Sam, about a writer who is a huge fan of classic movies, especially ones starring Humphrey Bogart. So, we'll continue to see fandoms rise and fall, It's exciting to know these tight-knit communities will be there to embrace and support our passions. It'll also be astonishing to watch the power they truly hold. After all, it can be said that a fandom did storm the US Capitol on January 6, 2021. So maybe one day, fanboys will become canon in the Star Wars universe, or at least as big a deal as Galaxy Quest has become for Star Trek fans. But until then, I'm content with my cozy fandom, here with you. I really appreciate you sticking through to the end. Reach out to me anytime at j.kennedy@outlook.com. New episodes are available weekly, so be sure to subscribe for the next one. I'm Jay Kennedy, and you've been listening to Another Lens. The show will be back soon with another perspective.